Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear students, I am Safir Hussain, back with your third lecture for your subject Introduction to English Literature 2. In the previous lecture, we talked about the rise and development of English novel till the 18th century, and in that lecture, we discussed various contributing factors that contributed to the establishment and to the rise of English novel till 18th century. And in the previous video, we had also talked about some social factors that contributed to the rise and development of English novel in the 18th century and beyond as well. So today, inshallah, we shall see various contributing factors that contributed. So let's begin. The first slide will talk about some general comments of English novel, and we know that a novel is defined as a long fictitious prose narrative, and it portrays and it depicts, it presents human life and human experiences, especially the inner experiences or the psychological experiences of a common person. And we have so far studied that the English novel was properly established in the 18th century, and the 18th century is also called as the age of sense or the age of reason or the Augustan age, and you will study about those ages in your subject history of English literature. And in the previous lecture, we talked about English novel that has long roots, and English novel has long connections, and those connections, they date back and they reach back to the oldest literature of the world. And we also said that Samuel Richardson is considered as the first ever English novelist in the history of English literature, and his novel Pamela, which he wrote in 1741, is considered to be the first ever true English novel. So 18th century is attributed for the birth of English novel, and the critics say that 18th century is the century which created English novel or modern English novel in its true sense, and 18th century contributed to the subsequent growth and development of English novel in the history of English literature. We saw that the predecessors or the forerunners, they paved the way, they made and showed the way for the other writers so that they could write, and those writings were later termed as novels. But we had mentioned that there were several social factors that also contributed to the development of novel and to the formation of novel as a separate genre. And those social factors are increase in literacy rate, industrial revolution, decline of romance and drama, rise of the middle class, and coming up or establishment of libraries. So the middle class actually is the focal point, is the basis, or is the main element that contributed to the development of novel in the 18th century and beyond 18th century. So let's look at all these factors one by one. The first factor is the industrial revolution. 18th century saw its industries developing, and a lot of machines and industry was developed during this century. And the factor that or the cause these machines and industry development contributed is that it gave people more leisure time, more free time, and more time to rest. And in that free time, the people, they filled their free time with things to read, for example newspapers and magazines, and gradually novels. Another contribution of the industrial revolution to the society was the invention or proper invention of the printing press. And because of the printing press, the people or the writers or the publishers, they were able to print with very less cost. And what happens when you print with less cost, the things they become affordable for common people or lower classes or middle classes. So because of the printing press, printing was done with less cost, and because of less cost, the novels or the magazines and other things to read, they became affordable for middle class. So when middle class could afford these things, they read these things, they bought these things and read them, and gradually the demand for magazines and newspapers and novels increased, and with increased demand, production also increased. And because of the printing press, the newspapers and magazines and journals, they were easy to print, and because of the less cost, everyone had access to them. And as everyone had access to them, it developed a reading habit in people, especially in the middle class. And middle class is always in great majority in the population. So when a great majority of the population develops a reading habit, it changes the whole society. The second factor for the rise of novel in the 18th century is the decline of romance and drama. We have talked about romances and their content and what kind of stories are romances. So we have seen in the previous lecture that romances, they generally are relevant to elite or upper class only, because romances talk about knights and kings and queens and princes and princesses, and these stories and these people generally, they are not completely relevant to common people. Common people had no interest in these stories of upper class or kings and queens. So gradually romances declined, and the demand for romances, it also got down, and romances had unrealistic plots and settings. They used very imaginative plots and imaginative settings, and they also told centuries old stories. So all these things, they were not completely relevant for common people, and the common people had less interest in these things, and they had more interest in stories which depicted them, or stories which were about the life of common people. So common people were more interested in stories that talked about themselves. So romances declined, and the demand for it also declined, and drama also declined in the 18th century, because drama was banned during the Puritan age or during the 17th century. In the previous century, before the rise of drama, of novel, drama was banned. And also, if drama continued in the 18th century, it had limited audience, because a theater cannot accommodate a very large number of people or population. And the drama had also less relevance for common people, because drama in that period also talked about things and stories which are relevant to only elite people or upper class. So there was less demand for drama as well. So drama and romance declined, and the only genre that was in demand was novel. So novel gradually developed. The most important factor in the development and rise of novel in the 18th century is the middle class. The middle class rised in this century, and with its rise, the demand for novel rised, and with the increased demand, the writing and production of novels, the printing of novels, the publishing of novels also increased. Industrial revolution, it gave tremendous growth, and it presented very much more job opportunities to people than the previous ages. And with more job opportunities, more people from lower class, they got jobs and they got their salaries and wealth, and gradually they became the middle class, and the number and quantity of middle class, it gradually rose. And the new middle class, they, as happens in every society, the middle class always tries to copy or imitate the fashionable class or the upper class. So the upper class, they used to read literature as fashion. So the new middle class, it imitated and it copied the upper class, and they started reading. Especially the women readers, they grew in number. And because of their rise and because of the rise of middle class, demand for relevant literature increased, because middle class was not properly interested in stories related to romances or in stories which presented the upper class. The middle class was interested in stories that depicted them or the middle class. So the life and psyche, or the life and psychological life or inner life of middle class was focused. The writers, they turned their attention towards the middle class. They talked about the problems, they talked about the issues, they talked about the social evils that were there in the middle class, and in that way novel writing, it gradually developed and flourished. And one of the important factors in the rise of English novel was the establishment and coming up of libraries. So there were mobile libraries. And what do we mean by mobile libraries? Mobile libraries were libraries that provided books and magazines and newspapers to people at their homes. So people had to get memberships for those libraries, and after memberships, the libraries, they provided books door to door, so that people could sit at their homes and read and enjoy. So most of the female readers, they used to be at home. So the number of women readers increased because of these mobile libraries. And when the number of readers increased, especially the females, the literacy rate, or the rate of people who could read and write, it also increased. With the increased literacy rate, with increased number of readers, demand for reading material also increased. And the most prominent and dominant reading material in that period was novels. And especially some novels were also published episode wise in magazines and newspapers. So people could either read novels or they could read newspapers, etc. So in this way, because of all these factors, because of the industrial revolution and rise of the middle class, because of the increase in literacy rate and other factors, novel writing developed. So this is all about the social factors that contributed in the rise of the middle class, and as a consequence and as a result, because of the rise of the middle class, the reading habit was increased, the literacy rate was increased, and the number of readers increased. And because of all these factors, novel writing developed, it flourished, and it rised, and it saw its growth in the 18th century. Thank you very much, dear students. And if you have other questions or confusions related to today's video or today's content, you can ask me on any forum, or you can use any medium to ask your questions and get your confusions and questions cleared. Thank you very much.